There comes a moment in every conscious life when one must confront the unbearable silence that follows the act of expression, a moment when the words, thoughts, and revelations poured out from the deepest regions of the self are met not with engagement, but with an indifferent void. It is the lament of the unseen soul, "Nobody reads me." But what truly is meant by this complaint? Does it merely speak of readership, of eyes upon pages and ears attuned to one's thoughts? Or is it a deeper cry, a yearning to be understood, to be acknowledged as a living, breathing, suffering presence? The voice that says, "Nobody reads me," is not complaining about the lack of audience. It is mourning the absence of communion. To write, to speak, to create, is to reveal the contents of the soul. It is a sacred exposure of what lies within, often without full understanding of it ourselves. Each sentence constructed with earnestness becomes a mirror, not merely to others, but to the one who dares to express. And yet, when such exposure receives no reflection back, no gaze that says, "I see you," the soul begins to fracture. This feeling is not born from arrogance. It does not emerge from the ego's hunger for praise, though the ego may quickly exploit it. It arises from the archetypal need for recognition, an eternal hunger that underlies human nature. The desire to be read is the desire to be witnessed, to be received, to be made real through the eyes of another. In ancient rituals, to name something was to give it life. To be read, then, is to be named, to be called forth from the shadows of insignificance. The danger lies not in the solitude, but in mistaking silence for invalidation. One may fall into despair, interpreting the absence of reply as evidence of worthlessness. But in truth, the path of the soul is rarely applauded while it is being walked. Those who dwell in the depths speak in tongues not easily deciphered by the surface dwellers. They speak of pain, transformation, dreams, contradictions. They speak of symbols and shadows. Such language cannot be consumed like casual entertainment. It demands the death of comfort and the birth of depth. And few are willing to pay that price. So when you say, "Nobody reads me," consider what kind of reading you are asking for. Are you pleading for passive glances, or are you craving the sacred act of being seen in your totality? If the latter, then know this: it is not that nobody reads you. It is that you have dared to write in a language that few have learned, and that is not your failure. It is your initiation. You may not be read widely, but you are speaking with the soul's authenticity. And the soul does not require a crowd to echo its truth. It only needs one receptive heart, one silent witness, for the entire act to be redeemed. And often, the first reader of your soul must be yourself. Before you can demand that others read you, ask, have you read yourself? Have you sat in silence with your own words and felt the resonance of your own truth? Because when you do, you will begin to see that this solitude is not exile, it is preparation. You are not being ignored, you are being refined. What you carry is not meant for everyone. It is meant for those who are starving in silence, for those whose inner lives are collapsing under the weight of superficiality, for those who don't even know yet that they are seeking you. To be read by the right person is not a strategy, it is a consequence, and those who are meant to read you will find you not by advertisement, but by resonance. They will recognize in your words the echo of their own forgotten voice. And when they do, the loneliness of your path will vanish, not because the world changed, but because you realized it was never about the world. You are not unread. You are being preserved, for the eyes that see, for the minds that feel, for the hearts that have not yet awakened to the necessity of your words. And until then, read yourself, reread yourself, learn your own language. Because in doing so, you are not waiting for the world to see you. You are becoming the very thing that reveals the world. the cry of nobody reads me, is not a plea for attention but a deeper yearning to be truly seen, understood, and validated in one's inner truth. You must first become the devoted reader of your own soul before the world can recognize the value of your expression. The cry of nobody reads me is not a plea for attention but a deeper yearning to be truly seen, understood, and validated in one's inner truth. At the surface, it may appear like a frustration born from external neglect, a complaint against the world's indifference to one's voice. But to stop there would be to mistake the symptom for the cause. The utterance carries within it something far more profound, something ancient that resonates deep in the unconscious, the human desire to be mirrored. The longing is not for the mere consumption of words, but for the recognition of essence, for another consciousness to say, I see you, I hear you, I know this place you speak from. This is a need rooted not in vanity, but in the very architecture of the human psyche. To be seen is to be confirmed as real. To be read is to be validated as meaningful. And when that fails to happen, the soul trembles at the prospect that it may be lost in the void of meaninglessness. This experience is most acute in those who speak or write from a depth that few dare to enter. When one speaks from the surface, the world listens casually, for the language is familiar and the content is easily digested. But when one articulates from the deep sea, from the abyss of lived contradiction, unresolved sorrow, unspoken fear, and the subtle intuitions of the psyche, the words come soaked in symbolic truth, and symbolic truth does not shout. It whispers, it murmurs through metaphor, image, and rhythm. It asks the reader to descend, not just to comprehend, and in that descent the reader is forced to confront their own unknowns. Most are not prepared to do so. Therefore, the writer of depth often writes in a tongue that few can translate. This is not rejection. It is the cost of authenticity. The cry of nobody reads me arises not because one's words are void of meaning, but because the meaning has not yet found its vessel in another. At the core of this condition is the archetype of the orphaned voice. This is the aspect of the psyche that carries a message but finds no home. It wanders the landscape of culture, language, and relationship, knocking on doors that remain closed, not out of cruelty, but because they are unready. The orphaned voice is not just poetic metaphor. It is the psychic wound that emerges when one's expression is not mirrored. And just as a child develops a sense of self through the eyes of its caregiver, so too does the adult soul seek to stabilize its identity through recognition. Without this mirroring, one risks fragmentation. One begins to question the reality of one's own inner life. One begins to wonder if the voice they trusted was simply noise. This is the threshold of despair. But it is also the threshold of transformation. To stand here and continue speaking, to write though unread, is to declare that meaning does not require applause. It is to say that the act of expression is sacred in and of itself. This is not the justification of failure. It is the discovery of autonomy, when one no longer writes to be read, but writes because not writing would be a betrayal of self. One has touched the fountain of individuation. This is the process through which the psyche becomes whole, not through assimilation by the world, but through fidelity to its inner necessity. The work then becomes not an offering to the crowd, but a dialogue with the soul. If the world listens, it is a blessing. If it does not, the dialogue remains no less true. Still, the pain of being unread cannot be erased through stoicism. It must be felt, it must be honored, because that pain itself is evidence of the soul's vitality. It is a wound that marks the soul's refusal to become invisible. Only those who long to be seen carry the fire to speak authentically, and only those who speak authentically can hope to awaken the sleeping reader who will, in time, recognize the resonance. Therefore, the pain is not a signal of defeat, it is the labor of gestation. Something in the psyche is being born, and birth does not come without blood. To understand this is to enter a new relationship with solitude. The solitude becomes less of a punishment and more of a womb. It becomes the space in which one learns to listen inward, to read one's own soul before asking others to do so. This self-witnessing is essential. It is the anchor that prevents collapse into despair. When the inner reader awakens, when you can hold your own words and feel their truth reverberate in your body, then you are no longer entirely dependent on the gaze of others. And paradoxically, it is often at this point, when one has accepted their own vision without need for validation, that the world begins to turn its eyes toward them, not because they have changed their message, but because they have become its embodiment. There is no formula to being seen. There is no guarantee that truth will be met with recognition in one's lifetime. History is littered with those whose words were buried while they lived, only to be unearthed generations later. This does not diminish their worth. It reveals the slowness with which the collective psyche awakens. To speak from the soul is to speak ahead of one's time, and to be ahead of one's time is, by necessity, to be partially alone. This loneliness, however, is not a curse. It is the silence before the echo. It is the empty field before the seeds sprout. Those who dare to plant in barren soil must trust the seasons. They must trust the depth of their roots, unseen as they may be, because those roots are not wasted. They are becoming the foundation for what the world has not yet asked for, but will one day need.